If I could ask you to please have a seat, we're about to get started. Well, good morning, and thank you all for being with us. We're very pleased to be back after a holiday break, and we hope everyone's holidays were as much fun as each of ours. We're going to begin this morning with an invocation from the Reverend James Stowe, who's the director of the Office of Human Rights. Please. And please stand if you are able.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we pray, tomorrow we celebrate the 91st birthday of one of America's greatest leaders. And it was not in the instance of him becoming a great leader through education, through preparation of life. It was at his kitchen table in Jackson, on Jackson Street in Montgomery, Alabama, that he had a destiny between what he might do and all that he was facing and all the challenges he was dealing with, both personal and professional. What in fact he would do going forward. How would he take on this great responsibility? And I'm to understand that in the midnight hour on Jackson Street, in the kitchen of the parsonage of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, that he realized something more important than anything he'd ever learned at all of his other institutions of higher learning. It was not about him. It was about the love he had for the entire community. And so in the spirit of that love, of that recognition of leadership, we ask now we all pray. We pray to God for your continued blessings for Montgomery County. We have so much to be thankful for, even in the midst of change and challenge. We are thankful for the talents and skills of our county council, county executive, other elected officials, and leaders of this great community. We pray that all will use their collective gifts to not only elevate, but to illuminate our community. And that by the examples of your love for us, that they will illustrate through their deliberations, their debates, and their decisions, the ultimate love that they themselves have for this community. That they, indeed we, lose ourselves and see the whole community in the hard work of building the beloved community for all who make Montgomery County their home. This is our prayer. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend. That was truly a wonderful way to start this year. The next we have presentations, and I'm going to ask Councilmember Craig Rice and County Executive Mark Elrich to please come forward and give a proclamation.
Thank you very much, Council President, and I'm joined by our County Executive, Mark Elrich. I also have in the audience with me our Director of Environmental Protection, so I'd ask Mr. Adam Ortiz. Come forward. Is that him here? Oh, there you are, Adam. Come on up. We've also got our Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, Jeff Gantz, if he's here. Come on up, Jeff. And then we also have our Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Fire Chief Scott Goldstein, as well as from the Fire and Rescue John Kinsley. So please come forward, guys. It's interesting that Reverend Stowe, Director Stowe, started off with talking about Martin Luther King, because I believe that one of the things he embodied most was about understanding how knowledge is power. Understanding that being informed and having a better awareness of your situation can help you in your everyday life. And so certainly one that we have here is making sure that we can share as much information with our residents as possible, and having the partners behind me who are all focused on making sure that that information is there is incredibly important. Many people don't know this, but radon gas is actually a colorless, odorless gas that can cause cancer. It's actually the second leading cause of cancer in the United States behind smoking. So when people talk about and have the warning labels on cigarettes talking about how dangerous smoking is, right behind that is radon. And what a lot of people don't know is in this region, in this mid-Atlantic area, radon is actually one of the most, it's the most prevalent in this country. There are a couple other areas to the northeast as well that are highly prevalent of radon. And so what we did is we said, wait a minute, we know that this is an issue. How can we make sure that we're protecting our residents? And so working with the partners here, we came up with a plan that said every single time that a home is sold, we make sure that we're going to do radon testing to ensure that families and people are safe. And I really want to thank our Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, because you know that sometimes issues surrounding possibly selling a house are important to realtors. But what was more important to them, and what they said is more important to them, is the safety of those families that are moving into those homes. And so I really just want to say that we all know that we continue to do a great job here in Montgomery County of promoting the safety of our residents. And it's highlighted by the partnership that we have that you see right up here. This is what we do each and every day, coming up with ways that we can keep our community safe. And I just really want to thank all of our partners for helping to make that happen. So thank you guys, and I'll turn it over to our county executive.
So there's not much to add to that. I was on the council when Craig introduced this legislation, and I was really happy with the ease in which we were able to actually implement it. Radon is, as he said, a dangerous cancer-causing gas, and you have no idea when you're being exposed to it unless you run tests. It is actually can be remediated, so the fact that there's radon present doesn't mean that people have to give up their houses. There's a way to treat your house in a way that the radon gas can be removed and be made safe, but you don't know you need to do that unless you do the testing. So we're encouraging people to make sure their houses are safe. The county can provide some advice and guidance on this, and it's really important that all of us understand that the dangers that are involved in radon. We're in a highly susceptible area, and if you're doing new construction, you absolutely have to think about what happens when you break the ground open. So I want to thank Craig for his work on this and the council I served on for getting this passed, and I think it's a recognition of something people, it's really important that they're aware of. So thank you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Mr. County Executive. Jeff, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Councilmember, and to the council for your work on this. Radon is an important part of knowledge in home sales, and as part of the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, we've done our part to make sure that it's reflected in the contracts. Radon does not discriminate. It doesn't matter where in the county you are or where you live. It can be found in any home, anywhere. Your next door neighbor may have it and you may not. It doesn't matter. But it's such an easy fix that there's no reason for it not to be tested and for the repairs to be done to mitigate the potential harm.
All right, so I'm going to read the proclamation, and I really want to thank our fire department, the chief. I could see didn't want to speak, but he's been such a great partner with us on so many initiatives dealing with safety, especially when it comes to homes, radon, carbon monoxide. So, Chief, thank you and your great department for all the work they've done. I'll start reading the proclamation. Mr. County Executive, do you want to alternate? Sure. All right. Whereas radon is an invisible, odorless, radioactive gas that is the leading cause of lung cancer among non-smokers in the United States and claims the lives of 20,000 Americans each year, and
whereas 1 in 15 homes across the nation has radon levels above the recommended guidelines, and the Environmental Protection Agency has designated Montgomery County as a Zone 1 area, which has the highest potential for critical radon levels, and
whereas Montgomery County was the first jurisdiction in the United States to enact a law requiring single-family homes to be tested for radon prior to being sold, because the only way to know if a home has elevated radon levels is to test it.
And whereas in January is National Radon Action Month, A perfect time to promote radon awareness, as testing is the most effective in cooler weather months when the houses tend to be closed up for warmth, and because steps can be taken to address radon levels in homes. And
whereas the U.S. Surgeon General recommends every home be tested for radon, and that testing is inexpensive and easily available through the mail, hardware, or home improvement stores, now therefore be it resolved that the County Executive and County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby acknowledge January 2020 as National Radon Action Month and urge all residents to test their homes for radon and, if necessary, make simple but life-saving improvements in their home or buildings to lower their health risks. And it's signed this 14th day of January in the year 2020 by myself, our County Council President, Sidney Katz, and our County Executive, Mark Elrich. And I'll give this to our Director of Environmental Protection, Adam Ortiz.
Well, thank you very much. I'm now going to do a couple of proclamations, and I'm going to ask the Chief of Police, Marcus Jones, to please join us. The Fire Chief, Scott Goldstein, to please join us. I'm going to ask the County Executive, if he'll pay attention for 2 seconds, to please join us. And then I'd also like to ask Sergeant Scott Brooks and Lieutenant Wesley C. Owens to please come forward. And everybody who's in their family or is associated with this proclamation to please come forward. And police officers, firefighters, everybody, please. As chair of the Public Safety Committee, I'm ingrained in the opportunities and challenges faced by our first responders. I'm the chair now. Mark was the chair before me for the Public Safety Committee. And I have the utmost respect for the work that they do each day to serve and protect our community. I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to extend my gratitude to Sergeant Scott Brooks and Lieutenant Wesley Owens for their decisive action and life-saving work in response to a house fire on July 16th of the past year. I'm going to read a proclamation, but did you want to say a few words and congratulations?
I want to congratulate folks who did this work. I mean, it's really important that I think people forget that when you're in this line of work, you can be called upon to put your life on the line at any time. None of us have to deal with that every day. And it takes a person with a certain level of determination and real commitment to other people to be willing to put themselves in a position where they can be called on to do things that are dangerous and could ultimately have serious consequences. And I want, all of our first responders to know we appreciate the work they do, we respect the work they do, and all of us thank them for making Montgomery County safer and protecting our residents and making sure this is a place where we can say that public safety is a priority. So thank you for what you did.
Mark, you did such a good job of reading the other proclamation. We're going to ask you to try to do that again. I know the pressure's on you. Whereas on July 16, 2019, a house on Stanley Lane in Colesville caught fire, and 2 passerbys, a police officer and a firefighter, both on their way to work, saw the burning house and acted decisively. And
whereas Montgomery County Police Department Sergeant Scott Brooks, the first on the scene, broke down the door of the house, helped one of the homeowners escape, and then re-entered the house to rescue the second homeowner who had mobility issues. And
whereas Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service Lieutenant Wesley C. Owens arrived, called 911, and then entered the house to assist with the rescue efforts. And
whereas both homeowners were evacuated from the house without injuries and firefighters were able to put out the blaze after 30 minutes. And whereas Montgomery County recognizes the value that dedicated and capable heroic first responders bring to ensuring the safety of our residents.
And whereas Sergeant Brooks and Lieutenant Owens bravely put themselves in harm's way to ensure the safety of two of our community members. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby honors and commend Sergeant Scott Brooks and Lieutenant Wesley C. Owens for their life-saving emergency and response efforts. It presented today and signed by me. Congratulations. We have another proclamation for both of you. Here's yours. You have somebody to help you hold it. Would either of you gentlemen like something to say? You sure?
I'll say something.
Please.
I just think that it's truly incredible that somebody who has never received training in the fire department like I have stepped across and did a role that has no experience in. It's truly special. I'm impressed. That's what a true hero is.
I'm going to ask my colleagues to please come down and join us. Whenever somebody saves a life, we should do that. And I'm going to ask the audience to please stand and give a standing ovation. They are most deserving. And congratulations again to our heroes. For those who did not know, the gentleman that decided to do the selfie is Pete Peringer, who we like to call him Tweety Petey. That's what he always does. So, but anyhow, and he's doing more of it over here. If I could please invite the people who were associated with the Korean Proclamation, Korean Proclamation today, to please join me in the front as well. I'm going to ask everyone who's here to please introduce themselves, and then we're going to read a proclamation.
Vicky Lee Bauer. Lee Young-suk from Casca.
Harold Payan, Korean Community Service Center.
Hi, Ji-young Cho, Korean Community Service Center.
Julie Lee, Montgomery County Public School, working for Korean parents.
Chung Park, retired administrative judge.
Councilor Jung Ye-sung from the Korean Embassy.
Myung-won Kwon, Korean calligrapher.
Hyun-suk Choi, former Montgomery County Korean Association president.
Young Jae-eun from World Kima Association.
Kwang Lee from the Casca.
Jay Kim from Global Mission Church.
Mana 24 Christian newspaper reporter, Abby Parr.
Matthew Lee, proud of a Montgomery County resident.
He knows how to get applause, doesn't he? We're going to read a proclamation, and I'm going to ask the county exec to please do that as well. Did you want to say a few words before?
Sure. The proclamation is recognizing the contributions of the Korean community to Montgomery County. I'll note that I think it was 117 years ago that the first Koreans came to the United States. Today in Montgomery County, there are about 18,000 Koreans who make this their home. They contribute to every aspect of Montgomery County life, from small businesses to the biosciences to engineering to education. They are strong advocates for schools, and they have, certainly, I think, thrived in this county. We continue to work with them, and I'm really proud of what they've been able to accomplish here. And it's been really great members of this community, and you have leaders who engage us constantly. So you're very present. I think we know, what your issues have been, and you've been easy. I think, frankly, pretty easy to work with because we don't have to guess, and you're all pretty well spoken about what you need and how you see yourselves partnering with the county. That's important. So thank you all, and thank all the members of your community. I hope you will go back and convey the county's thanks to all the people that you represent in the community.
And thank you, Mr. County Executive, and I'd just like to echo those words and sincerely thank each and every one. Would we like to try to do this one more time? Yeah. Whereas on January 13th, 1903, the first Korean immigrants arrived in the Hawaiian Islands, marking the first entry of Korean immigrants to the United States territory, and
whereas Korean Americans served their communities and their country during World Wars I and II and in the Korean War. During these times, more Koreans made the decision to emigrate from their homeland, some as wives to U.S. servicemen, others as adopted children, and whereas the achievements and contributions of the Korean Americans are widely acknowledged and recognized across diverse areas such as commerce and finance, technology, medicine, education, journalism, the arts, and virtually all aspects of American life. And in recent years, Korean American Day is officially recognized in communities from coast to coast, and
whereas through hard work, talent, and resources, Korean Americans have helped make Montgomery County one of the nation's outstanding places to live, work, educate children, and to raise a family. And whereas Montgomery County, the state of Maryland, and the entire United States are richer for the contributions of the Korean American community, and although January 13 is annually celebrated as Korean American Day, the contributions of Korean Americans are appreciated 365 days a year. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County hereby recognizes January 13, 2020, as Korean American Day in Montgomery County, and be it further resolved that the historical significance of this milestone is only part of the greater appreciation Montgomery County residents have for the valuable contributions Korean Americans have made and continue to make to Montgomery County in the United States of America. It's signed today by me. I'm going to ask Judge Park if he had if you would please say a few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the County Council and the County Executive, people of Montgomery County, and of course our proud Korean American residents in Montgomery County. I sincerely extend my gratitude to celebrate this Korean American Day. And as you know, last year Korea celebrated 100th independent movement in 1919. So it's even more meaningful that the Montgomery County shares with us the spirit of freedom and democracy. And also this year, we will celebrate the 70th, not celebrate, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War, the tragic Korean War on the Korean Peninsula. And we always remember the sacrifices of American soldiers to safeguard the freedom and democracy in Korea. And thanks to their sacrifice, the Korea has now become the world's 12th largest economy. And we always remember that there are strong ties between the Korea and the United States, and it will be strengthened in the future ahead. And also the friendship and the unity between the Korea and the Montgomery County will also be strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to take a photo. We have proclamations for everyone up here, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to please stand, and we're going to take a photo, please. Please.
I just want to thank my district council president, Sidney Katz, and also only one woman council, Nancy Navarro, former president. I really want to thank for the recognizing us and all the council members, and of course our honorable county executive. So Montgomery County is not only for the Korean American, all the Asian American. So my business is in headquarters in Rockville, so we are open for business. Okay, thank you.
Boom.
Don't let the FRS leave.
It's a whole different view.
You like it up here?
The air is crisp. Imagine being Barbara. Imagine being Barbara. And berating the staffer. Like the staffer was not there to put berating.
Thank you, bro. Congratulations. Congratulations, Matthew.
Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah.
That's the coffee would not be the most revered coffee. Man, this is.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we're going to continue our meeting. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements or petitions?
Yes, Mr. President. Good morning. We have one addendum item, the public hearing on the Germantown plan for the town sector zone scheduled for January 14th, 2020 at 7:30 p.m. has been postponed. We will have a public hearing that will be rescheduled at a future date. In addition, we have another announcement. The public hearings on the FY21 capital budget and FY21 to 26 capital improvements program will be held on February 5th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. and February 5th and February 6th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Persons wishing to testify may sign up beginning January 17th, 2020. Also, we have no receipt of petitions.
Thank you very much. Next is the approval of the minutes from November 26, 2019. Are there any corrections? If not, they will be as received. Thank you. They are as received. Next is the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Somebody's going to have to tell me who just so moved. I think was Council Member Navarro, and seconded was Vice President Hucker. I see no lights on. Now I do. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to point out item G, where we are. It's a resolution to reappoint Director of the Office of Legislative Oversight, Christopher Selar. I just want to acknowledge and thank Mr. Selar for his great work leading this office, as well as all the researchers that comprise this office. Their reports really do not only help us make informed decisions, but I think also I've heard time and time again the public being very grateful for these reports and for the opportunity to have this in-depth analysis available. So just wanted to point it out, and I want to congratulate you and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, wanted to highlight item G and thank all the staff, particularly Mr. Selar, for the leadership that he exudes over the staff of the Office of Legislative Oversight, which serves a really important function in our county government as an independent, nonpartisan research arm of the county, and we rely heavily on those workers and that information in all the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we all acknowledge that Chris is truly a remarkable person. And with that, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by raising their hand for our consent calendar. Those opposed, and it's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is Legislative Day 2, the introduction of bills, and the first one is Bill 1-20, Health and Sanitation Bodywork Establishments Licensing Amendments. The lead sponsor is Councilmember Rice and Hucker, and I would also like to be added to that as well, and I have a feeling we're going to have a few others. Councilmember Rice, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I really want to thank you and the Vice President for your sponsorship, and I want to thank this Council as a body for continuing to make sure that we highlight the challenges associated with human trafficking and continue to do what we can to make a difference. I will tell you that this piece of legislation actually came as a result of our Department of Permitting Services, who's responsible with actually going in and checking on these establishments, as well as our Department of Health and Human Services, who partner with them to ensure that establishments aren't conducting an illegal activity. And they asked us, based on the law that we previously had passed, both Council Vice President Hucker and I, to follow up on this legislation because there were some loopholes that were being had, and we wanted to make some changes to it. I will tell you that the nice thing about this piece of legislation is that it actually goes a bit farther in terms of promoting the safety of Montgomery County residents. One of the things that we've heard through reflexology that often happens at some of our malls and shopping centers is that there's actually a danger posed by performing these services if you don't have the proper training. Some of those things could include causing circulatory problems in your feet, blood clots or inflammation of your leg veins. It could actually cause gout and foot ulcers. It could actually promote episodes of epileptic seizures. It could cause thyroid problems. All of these are things that we don't want our residents to suffer as a result of someone who's not properly trained. And so what this does is it basically says that if you're going to be putting your hands on the body, if you're going to be in one of these body work establishments, that you need to be licensed. You need to have a license to be able to ensure that you know what you're doing. At the same time, what this also does when it comes to folks who are being trafficked, if folks are wondering what the connection is that oftentimes our traffickers are not going to put forth the money, nor the time necessary to actually put these folks who are being trafficked through this training, nor pay for the money. And so they just won't come here. My hope is that this will continue to be something that we see not only here in Montgomery County, but promoted in the District of Columbia and Prince George's and Howard and all of our neighboring jurisdictions. And so I've been in contact with their leaders as well. I've had this conversation at our Maryland Association of Counties Winter Conference. And so we're hoping to really promote this as a regionalistic approach to not only promoting the safety of our residents as a whole, but also ensuring that victims that we know are unfortunately forced to work in some of these establishments are continuously victimized. And so I present that to the body, Mr. President. I thank you for your indulgence and hope that working with our Human Trafficking Task Force, I know there were a couple of concerns they had about ensuring that victims are protected. And so certainly we're welcome to amendments from our Human Trafficking Task Force that will help to ensure that we have a bill that does everything that we want it to do, protects our victims, protects our community, and makes sure that we can say that Montgomery County and this region is not a place where we welcome human trafficking and victimization of folks. And so I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Next, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much. I definitely would like to be added as a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
I would like to as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Me as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is the calls for bills for final reading. And it.
Excuse me, was that an introduction of both the bill and the resolution?
No, the introduction for the next one it comes after this one.
Okay.
So for Board of Health, you're saying?
Yes.
But I have a thought that it's going to be introduced as Board of Health as well. Just call me omniscient. Next is the calls of bills for final reading. It's Bill 1819, Landlord-Tenant Relations, Relocation Expenses. And I'd like to ask before we start, and I know that we have several speakers, but my question is that the way that this is written is it says within 72 hours that someone has to make, they would have to make payment. What happens if the landlord does not make payment? What remedies do we have for that?
So the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is here, and they can speak to that more. What I can tell you is there are funds that the department can essentially use to bridge the gap so that they could provide the tenant with the funds so that they can get into new housing, and then they can work with the landlord for reimbursement of that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Giwando, please. Oh, I'm sorry. You're next. Councilmember Reamer, please.
Thank you. And then I'll, of course, turn it to Councilmember Giwando, who has distributed a memo and will be proposing an amendment. Great. Thank you. I will now just walk through the legislation and recap some of the conversation that we had. First of all, I want to thank Councilmember Giwando for his work on the issue generally of renter protections and bringing this bill forward to us. It's a very good bill. The committee worked through various details and is pleased to share a recommendation to the council. I think the committee supported the bill strongly. It's part of a ongoing priority for the council and the county to strengthen renters' rights. We passed landmark legislation several years ago, which I would note is really the basis of state legislation now that Delegate Vaughn Stewart has introduced, that really just seeks to bring to the state the same kind of policies that the county adopted or the council adopted in that legislation several years ago. We have legislation that we'll be voting on, I believe, next week. Councilmember Hucker has introduced the legislation for air conditioning, and so this is another, and it won't be the last initiative around renters issues. The proposal is intended to provide support to tenants who are displaced through no fault of their own when a building owner or landlord fails to keep the property in a livable condition. There are not a lot of examples of this around the country. council staff has identified one, Santa Cruz, California, and a community that I'm familiar with, having gone to school there. But it's fairly novel, so I'm not sure if that really matters one way or the other, but it's just something to note that there really aren't examples of other communities doing it, so we're leading the way here with this piece of legislation. I wanted to share my general sense of how I thought it would work. This is really, for me, a tool for our Department of Housing and Community Affairs to use as they, and we could ask the HCA if they'll please come up, as you'll need to come up in any event. This is a tool for Department of Housing and Community Affairs to use as they are talking with property owners, as they are hearing from tenants. The fact that the Department of Housing and Community Affairs can find that a building owner has neglected their responsibility and failed to keep their property in a good livable condition is powerful. And now the Department of Housing and Community Affairs can say to the property owner, as we pass this legislation, this is going to cost you if you don't fix it. You might have, maybe it's one unit or maybe it's several, but you're going to lose several months of rent. You're going to you're going to have to, it's going to cost you if you don't fix it. So get your act together. I think that is going to help resolve almost, I would hope, almost all of the cases. And in very few instances will, there actually be a situation where the property owner does not respond to that kind of incentive, or whether you want to call it a hammer or a carrot, carrot or a stick. But so from that perspective, I think it's valuable. I would hope that we don't have situations where tenants are somehow on their own to fight it out after the fact, but rather we're preventing tenants from being displaced in the first place. I think that's really the objective here. Although there may be some cases, there aren't a lot of cases in general that would likely fall into this category, but there are some, and some is enough, I think, to take action on. So there were a number of amendments that the committee adopted, some recommended by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs to ensure that we distinguish between temporarily displaced tenants and those who are permanently displaced. We adopted amendments from Habitat for Humanity to, for example, ensure that tenants had a right to reoccupy that housing after the issue is fixed. The most substantial discussion that we had centered around how the rent would be calculated, that the owner would be liable to pay to the tenant, and then for how many months would the owner be liable to pay that rent. And the initial proposal was for a fair market rent, which would have really, I think initially as we discussed it, been a very broad measure. So different housing markets have different average rents. And so we had a lot of discussion about should it be a regional average or a more localized average. We had discussion about whether it should be 3 months as introduced or 2 months as the committee recommended. One note is that we clarified that the owner is responsible for pro rata rent of that month. This is not a situation where the tenant is out the month that they've already paid. So I think you could safely imagine that as an average of 2 weeks. I don't know, generally speaking, that the tenant is entitled to there. So in the case that the building owner is non-responsive, under the committee recommended bill, that property owner is going to be responsible for essentially 2 months of rent that the payment for 2 months worth of rent and their pro rata rent as well. So that's really about 2.5 months. So I bring this to the council for consideration. Really, I think it's a complex issue. I think everyone should just give it some thought and conclude. The bill sponsor's initial comment was that what mattered the most was the calculation that we used for the amount of rent. And so we did end up going with his recommendation on calculating the amount of rent based on the index for that zip code. And the number of months initially was suggested that 2 months would be fine. So we went with that, but and the council member believed that 3 months would be better, and did not support the committee recommendation, and I believe he wants to revisit that. So that'll be the focus of the conversation, I'm sure, today. Again, I don't particularly feel strongly about it, but I think we need to, weigh these things all together and understand that certainly we're always concerned about the housing market and the ability of building owners to continue to provide housing, and we're concerned about the ability of those who live in our apartment communities to have good quality housing. So with that, I will turn it to my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President Katz, and thank you to my Fed colleagues, Councilmember Reamer and Friedson, for working through this bill with me on the committee, and I'm glad that it's come forward. I want to thank DHCA in particular, a lot of work behind the scenes to get this right, and I'm glad you all are up here so you can be seen by the millions watching at home, and we're thankful for you. I also want to thank Amanda and Christine Wellens, who isn't down here, but who tag team and worked on this bill and got it to a good place. I also want to thank my co-sponsors, then Council Vice President Katz, Councilmember Hucker, and then Council President Navarro and Councilmember Rice for co-sponsoring. Just a couple of remarks. So when I originally introduced the bill, I really was thinking a lot about the trauma that Montgomery County residents face when they live in a home, rental home, or an apartment, and when it's condemned for to be unfit for human habitation, which is what we're talking about here, through no fault of their own. And I just want us to think about that, because I think it's important when we talk about the amendment I'm going to offer. This is your home. Imagine if you woke up this morning and you got a knock on the door from DHCA, and they said, you're not able to live here anymore, you need to move right now, or within 24 hours, whatever the time period is. Imagine how jarring and scary that would be to those residents. I know it would shake my whole world up. And so this is an extreme case. This is when things have gone so wrong that a place is uninhabitable, unfit for human habitation. And that's what we're talking about, what the remedy should be. And I think that's important because we want to have maximum flexibility and take care of those tenants that are found in this situation. This is not a theoretical thing. This has happened in Montgomery County. There were 155 cases of condemnations, not all the same, but in FY18, we had residents, Councilmember Hucker and I have been at the Enclave where he led the charge to get all the inspections. There were residents in that apartment building in White Oak that were condemned and had to move immediately. So this is not theoretical. And we did some research looking at, Councilmember Reamer mentioned, Santa Cruz has this law, San Diego, Oakland, I believe, and Washington State. It's become clear to me that 3 months of fair market rent is a better solution here instead of 2. It's important to note that this bill, as was mentioned, is not a intent to have a punitive regime for landlords. The hope is, again, we don't want this to happen. This is a scary thing when it happens. We don't want it to happen. We want the number to go down. And we want to make sure that all of our residents have health-free, hazard-free, habitable places to live. And so that's what this bill is intended to do. Property owners that do not maintain their rental properties, however, and allow them to become unsafe or hazardous, they should bear the responsibility of their actions. That's an important part of this bill too. If you do something wrong, if you don't maintain, if you're in the business market renting a unit, whether commercially or residentially but in a multifamily or a single family home setting, you have to upkeep that property. It is also important to note, though, that if the tenant is the person who causes the condemnation because of their actions, or it's something that's out of the control of the landlord, act of God or something, the landlord will not be required to pay. And so I think that strikes the right balance, and that's a determination that DHCA has assured us they can make within their regulatory regime. Another piece of, I think, important part of the bill that we added, it allows the landlord and tenant to work out alternative arrangements. So say you're in a multifamily property and the unit is condemned, but you can move down the hall to another unit or another property that the landlord owns that is in habitable condition. That can kick in prior to having to go onto the regime under here, which is another level of flexibility. Because again, if you're someone that's lived in a place 10, 15, 20 years, you might not want to go out in the market. That's a scary thing, and try to find housing. So this also provides that flexibility. And the last thing I want to do is talk about just the pricing. So DHCA provided us with a list of condemnations, as I mentioned, in 2018, and then what the fair market rents were in the zip codes in the D.C., Virginia, and Maryland area, which we're fortunate to have by zip code broken out. Not every part of the country has that. They range the fair market rents from just about $1,200 a month to an efficiency to over $3,200 a month for a 4-bedroom. Those are rare, but that's the range. In the Hillendale Langley Park area, for example, where we unfortunately have a relatively high number of condemnations, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is nearly $1,700 a month. If a tenant has to provide a security deposit, which is often the case, 1 month's rent along with first and last month's rent, they potentially could have to bring more than $5,000 to move in to a new unit. This doesn't include moving costs, the possible utility or storage costs that they could incur, and you add that, you could get up to $6,000, $7,000. So that's why when we're talking about why 3 months is necessary, I think that's why we need to provide that flexibility. The pro rata rent, as was mentioned, will be provided. That's money that's already been paid. That's not the landlord's money. And security deposits, again, not the landlord's money, will be provided back to the tenant because that's their money. That should not be factored into the calculation, in my opinion, of how many months of rent you should pay. A 2019 survey of Go Banking rates found that almost half of their respondents, 45%, said they had $0 in a savings account. Another 25% said they had less than $1,000 in savings. If you're a low-income family or middle-income family, you do not have savings to fall back on if this happens to you. We have to take that into account, and relocation expenses in that instance, I think, could be very challenging. So we know we have a housing shortage in Montgomery County. We know we have high rent. It's a high cost of living. We've said as a council we're trying to tackle that. And we want to make sure everyone has clean, habitable places to live in our county. So this is not just a housing issue. I think it's a moral issue. It's the right thing to do. And again, it's an incentive for landlords, many of whom are doing a great job, to keep their properties in great condition. So I'd ask all my colleagues to join me in this, and I'd like to offer an amendment, which I distributed to my colleagues last night, to reinstate 3 months fair market rent instead of 2 on this bill. So I'd like to move that be added back.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by Councilmember Hucker. I see no lights for the discussion. All those in favor of the amendment to go to 3 months rather than 2 months, please raise your hand. I see Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Hucker, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Jovando, and Councilmember Glass, and myself. Those who are opposed, Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Friedson. Thank you. Next, we're going to actually just vote on the, I see no other lights. We're going to vote on the actual bill. Oh, I do see a light. Councilmember Jovando, please.
Just want to thank my colleagues and thank everyone for supporting. I'd also ask you to support the whole bill. I appreciate, again, working through this, and I think this is going to be a good tool for DHCA, and I want to thank all the advocates who have taken this cause up as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Again, it's a good bill. I think that we look forward to DHCA being able to bring this tool to enforce better protections for our renters. And I'm not sure there's really an important difference between 2 and 3 months. Hopefully, there will be, DHCA will be able to use this to prevent people from getting displaced. And I think 2 or 3 months will work out either way very powerfully as a strong enforcement tool. So I'm pleased to support the bill and thank Councilmember Jawando for his work on it. I know it comes directly from the experience of our residents dealing with challenging housing circumstances. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Councilmember Jawando, the sponsors, Councilmember Reamer, for leading the Fed committee through this process. I do want to, just reiterate that when we adopted the economic development platform, and it included the housing component, which also illustrated the new Council of Governments revised targets, part of this work, and we all agreed that we were going to commit ourselves to looking at ways not only to generate more housing, which, it's very important, but also to look at how we preserve existing affordable housing. And the issue of quality is also very important, because then it sets the stage to send a message that we are very serious about our housing affordability crises. This component, I think, levels the playing field and sends a message that when we're talking about preserving, we're also talking about quality, and that will be our culture. And so I do appreciate this, and I hope that as we are all beginning to engage in our individual development of action plans within each quadrant of the economic development platform, that we obviously note bills like these, because it is part of that story, and it will be part of this work, and hopefully our ability to achieve this goal regionally. So I do appreciate this work, and I just want to continually point out when we're doing things that are in alignment with the framework that we have adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glaze.
I want to commend my colleague, Councilmember Jawando, for putting forth this bill and for putting a lot of data into it as well, finding some best practices wherever he could, wherever staff could find that information too. I think the data is compelling, and the most compelling data to me is the fact that in a one-year time period there were 155 incidents out of 390,000 housing units here in Montgomery County. So that's the reality that we're talking about, trying to make life better for approximately 155 households here. And we spend a lot of time in the council talking about affordable housing, but this also takes us in the step of making sure that we're providing safe housing so that renters are treated as fairly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
So I want to echo the sentiments of appreciation to our colleague, Councilmember Jawando, for his great leadership in this. Again, from my perspective, I always like to try and respect the committee process, and so there was a, collaboration that had come to in terms of making some sort of compromise, and so wanted to respect that. But the overall bill is certainly something that is going to be tremendous in terms of ensuring that rights are protected for tenants in Montgomery County, something that we continue to know is incredibly important. It's one of the reasons why we always say that we're fighting for the little guy, the person who doesn't have the attorneys, doesn't have the ability to know the process and what goes on, and the more that we can do to beef up that to ensure that folks know what their rights are and that we're strengthening those rights are going to make a huge difference. It welcomes people in this county to know that there's a voice that's out there for them. So thank you for your great leadership. Thank this council for the great work that we continue to do to, again, make Montgomery County one of the best places to live. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank all my colleagues, and I almost forgot to thank Pam Luckett on my staff, who worked very hard on this bill, many hours, was here late last night, so I want to thank her for her work publicly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a feeling she was going to remind you about that, but Councilmember Albornoz.
Well, proud to support this bill and do appreciate the work of my colleagues on the committee. 3 months, 2 months, the hard work was done in the groundbreaking legislation in the first place. And so I really want to thank all three of my colleagues on the committee for their outstanding leadership. And I used to work for an organization called Latin American Youth Center in D.C., and I will never forget visiting properties there that were just shocking, just the decay that had occurred and how immigrants in particular are preyed upon. And so this does provide another very important tool in the toolbox for DHCA to address very real issues that occur in our region and our community. And so I'm proudly supporting this bill.
Thank you. I, too, want to congratulate Councilmember Jawando and everyone else associated with the bill. You know, my greatest concern, though, is really what happens to the person. It's a small number, but it's the person that the property owner says, I don't have that money. I don't have that $5,000. And that person needs to get out of that horrible situation. So I'm very pleased that the county does have some funds where they can bridge that gap, because it's not going to happen. It doesn't happen that often, and it's not going to happen that often that a property owner might not have those funds, but it's a reality, and especially when it's a single-family home. So thank you, and I believe this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes, so it's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item is a council sitting as the Board of Health, and this was sort of thought that this might happen today. I mean, some people can predict things, and if you'd like to tell us what the number is going to be later this evening, we'd appreciate that as well. Yeah, and who's going to win this football game? It's coming up. This is an introduction of the resolution to adopt Bill 120, Health and Sanitation Bodyworks Establishment Licensing as a Board of Health Regulation, and its public hearing is scheduled for February 4th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Oh, yes, Councilmember Rice, and thank you for pointing that out. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I forgot to thank a couple people, and I really want to start off by thanking Hadi Mansouri, who I think just stepped away, so our acting director of our Department of Permitting Services, and Clark Bile from our Department of Health and Human Services, who deals specifically with licensing. I also want to thank Scott McFarland from NBC4, who highlighted this story, because one of the things that we're really trying to do is promote and let folks know about how we're trying to get around this scourge of human trafficking that increases. And Senator Susan Lee has been doing a great job at the state level in terms of making sure that we're reducing or eliminating fines, as well as clearing out the records of anyone who's been convicted when it comes to some of these human trafficking cases, the victims. And so this really is working in tandem together, ensuring that we're getting to the people who are actually doing the bad stuff, getting to the people who are really preying on our victims. And so this is truly a team effort, and I really just wanted to thank all of them for being great partners in highlighting this. This is really important for this region, and so we're all working together to make this happen. So thank you.
Thank you. The next item, and to Jeff Sines. Yes, sir, please.
Just one point. In your action, you're actually adopting the provisions of Section 24(8)B, which are really the action portions of the bill.
Okay, well, this is the introduction of it. Yes, right. Thank you. Next item is a proposed closed session to conduct or discuss an investigative proceeding on actual or possible criminal conduct pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3-305, subsection B, subsection 12. The topic is an ongoing criminal investigation, and I'm asking for a motion.
Second.
Who was the first person? So Councilmember Rice moved it, and seconded by Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That was unanimous. Thank you very much. We will be meeting in a closed section next door in the conference room. The council will take up a number of public hearings at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you very much. So that.
changes a little bit. We talk about the architecture of the barn, the agriculture here in the community, as well as that intersection between the
Next on Did You Know? The Montgomery County 50 Plus Volunteer Network.